The first thing you should know is that this was never supposed to go this far. It started as a joke. Or maybe that's what I keep telling myself because the truth is harder to admit. My sister always said revenge doesn't come loudly. It comes smiling, patient, pretending to forget. And when it finally arrives, you don't even recognize yourself anymore. I used to think I knew my sister. Same house, same parents, same childhood photos hanging crooked in the hallway. But somewhere between growing up and growing apart, I became careless. Arrogant. Maybe. I teased her in front of others, mocked her interests, laughed when she tried something new and failed. I told myself it was harmless. Siblings do that, right? But words leave marks you can't see. And my sister never forgot a single one. The day everything changed didn't feel special at first. Rain tapping against the windows, power flickering, that dull evening silence that makes every thought sound louder. She called me into her room with that calm voice of hers. Too calm. I should have noticed. Her room smelled different that day, like fresh fabric and perfume she never wore before. The lights were soft, almost staged. She smiled and said, "You trust me, don't you?" That question should have scared me. Instead, I laughed. I always laughed. That was my problem. I nodded, careless, confident, unaware that I was stepping into something I wouldn't be able to walk back from. She told me she needed help with a project. Something about psychology, identity, understanding how people change under pressure. I rolled my eyes, joking that she was overthinking again. She didn't react. Just handed me a bag. Heavy. I remember the weight of it in my hands more clearly than anything else. "Just for tonight," she said. "Just play along." Inside the bag were clothes. Not mine. Soft fabric, delicate colors, something folded with too much care. My throat tightened. I tried to joke again, but the words didn't come out right. She watched me the whole time, like she was waiting for a switch to flip. "I won't force you," she said quietly. "But remember all those times you forced me to be someone I wasn't." That hit harder than any shout could have. Suddenly, this wasn't a joke. It was a mirror. And I didn't like what I saw in it. I told myself I'd wear it for a minute, just to end the conversation. Just to prove it meant nothing. But when I changed, when I felt the unfamiliar fabric against my skin, something inside me shifted. Not excitement. Not fear. Something deeper. Exposure. She adjusted my appearance with steady hands, not rushing, not hesitating. Every movement felt intentional. Like she was sculpting something she'd imagined for years. She stepped back, eyes sharp, satisfied. "There," she said. "My doll." I laughed again, but it sounded wrong. Hollow. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't laughing at her anymore. I was laughing to survive. She made me sit. Made me listen. She talked about control, about how easy it is to shape someone when you know their weaknesses. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Every sentence tightened around me like a thread pulling a knot closed. "You always said I was dramatic," she whispered. "Now look at you." I wanted to argue. I wanted to stand up and rip everything off and walk out. But my legs didn't move. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror, unfamiliar, vulnerable, silent. And the worst part wasn't how I looked. It was how clearly I felt seen. That night didn't end with shouting or tears. It ended with a promise. Her promise. "This is only the beginning," she said. "You'll understand me. Every version of me you ignored. And when you do, we'll see who you really are." I went to bed thinking it would all be over by morning. I was wrong. That was the night my sister's revenge truly began. And the night I started becoming someone I never planned to be. Morning didn't erase anything. That was the first shock. I woke up expecting embarrassment to wash it all away, like a bad dream you laugh about later. Instead, it sat heavy in my chest, unchanged. The house felt different too. Quieter. Like the walls knew something I didn't want to admit yet. At breakfast, my sister acted normal. Too normal. She passed the salt, asked about my plans, complained about the weather. But every time our eyes met, there was that look. Not anger. Not mockery. Control. Calm, precise control. I realized then that last night wasn't an outburst. It was a plan. When our parents left for the day, she closed the door and leaned against it slowly, like a scene she'd rehearsed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten me. She didn't have to. You can stop anytime, she said. All you have to do is say you understand. Understand what? That question burned inside me. I thought I understood her. I thought I'd always understood her. But she shook her head before I could speak, like she could hear my thoughts already. You never listened, she said. You decided who I was. Loud. Weak. Dramatic. So now, you'll listen. She brought out another bag. Bigger this time. Neatly organized. Labeled. That scared me more than anything. This wasn't impulsive. This was preparation. I tried to push back. I told her this was going too far. That siblings don't do this to each other. She didn't argue. She just reminded me of moments I'd buried deep. Jokes I'd made. Times I'd laughed when others joined in. Times I'd walked away when she needed backup. Each memory landed perfectly, like she'd rehearsed them too. Just words, right? She said softly. Clothes are just fabric. Names are just sounds. Or does it only not matter when it's me? I didn't have an answer. She didn't rush me. That was her smartest move. She let silence do the work. And in that silence, something cracked. Not my pride. My certainty. The version of myself that always knew where I stood suddenly felt unstable. When I changed again, it felt different. Heavier. Less like a costume, more like a role I'd stepped into without reading the script. She corrected my posture. My expressions. Not harshly. Patiently. Like a teacher. Look, she said, turning me toward the mirror. Really look. I avoided my reflection at first. Then I couldn't. There was confusion in my eyes. Fear. But also something else. Recognition. That terrified me. You see it, don't you? She asked. I shook my head. She smiled sadly. That's okay. It takes time. That was when she said it. The sentence that changed everything. For the world, she said, this is who you are now. At least for a while. My chest tightened. I asked her how far she planned to take this. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. As far as it takes for you to feel what I felt. Invisible. Misjudged. Trapped in someone else's version of you. She wasn't trying to humiliate me. That's what made it worse. She was trying to teach me. And teachers don't stop halfway. Days passed. Then weeks. She set rules. Boundaries. This wasn't chaos. It was structure. And slowly, dangerously, I adapted. I learned how to move, how to speak less sharply, how to listen more than I talked. I noticed things I'd never noticed before. Judgments in people's eyes. Assumptions made in seconds. The quiet exhaustion of always being interpreted instead of understood. And somewhere along the way, something terrifying happened. I stopped counting the days. That realization hit me late one night as I stared at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. My sister wasn't just reshaping my appearance. She was dismantling my certainty, piece by piece. And I couldn't tell anymore where her revenge ended, and where my transformation began. The moment I realized I'd stopped counting the days was the moment fear finally settled in. Not panic. Not shock. Fear. The quiet kind that doesn't scream, just sits beside you and waits. I remember staring at the ceiling that night, listening to the hum of the fan, wondering when exactly this stopped feeling temporary. My sister noticed before I said anything. She always did. She had developed this way of reading me that made lying useless. One look at my face and she nodded, like a doctor confirming a diagnosis she already knew. You're changing, she said. Not accusing. Observing. I snapped back that I was just playing along, that this was still her game, her revenge. She didn't argue. She never argued anymore. Instead, she asked me something I wasn't prepared for. Then why are you afraid of stopping? The question stuck. It echoed in my head all day. Why was I afraid? I told myself it was because of embarrassment, because of what people would think, because I didn't know how to explain any of this. But deep down, there was another answer I didn't want to face. Stopping meant going back to who I was. And I wasn't sure that person still fit. She began pushing me in subtler ways. Not with clothes or rules, but with situations. She sent me to do errands. Small ones at first. Then bigger ones. Each time, my heart would race, my thoughts spinning, convinced everyone could see straight through me. But most people didn't. They saw what they expected to see. And that realization shook me more than any stare ever could. One afternoon, someone spoke over me without noticing. Another time, someone smiled politely but didn't really listen. Tiny moments. Harmless on their own. Crushing when stacked together. I came home that day quieter than usual. My sister didn't say, "I told you so." She made tea. She listened. That confused me more than cruelty ever could. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about exposure. "You think I wanted to be strong all the time?" she said softly. "I learned to be, because no one helped me." That night, I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silently, the kind of crying that feels like leaking instead of breaking. I hated myself for it at first. Then I hated myself for hating myself. I was stuck in a loop of emotions I didn't have words for. And the worst part was this: she didn't force me anymore. She didn't need to. One morning, she didn't bring anything to me. No instructions. No bag. Just a simple question. "What do you want to wear today?" I froze. My mouth opened, then closed. This was different. Choice changes everything. Choice makes you responsible. I stood there for a long time before answering. When I finally did, my voice was steady. That scared me. She nodded, like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. Later that day, I caught my reflection again. But this time, I didn't flinch. I studied it. The posture. The expression. The calm. I looked real. Not like a disguise. Like a version of me I'd never been allowed to explore. That was the day I understood something terrifying and freeing at the same time. My sister's revenge wasn't about turning me into something else. It was about stripping away the armor I'd hidden behind for years. And once that armor was gone, I didn't know how to put it back on. I asked her that night if she hated me. She shook her head. "I wanted you to see me," she said. "But I didn't expect to see you too." We sat in silence after that. Not heavy. Not awkward. Just honest. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't performing for anyone. And that scared me more than anything else so far. Because if this was real, then the biggest question was still waiting. Who would I be when this ended? Once the question entered my mind, it refused to leave. Who would I be when this ended? I carried it with me everywhere, like a quiet shadow. Every conversation, every mirror, every moment of silence seemed to ask it again. And the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became. My sister noticed the shift before I did. She always sensed changes in atmosphere, in people. She said it was a survival skill. I think it was empathy sharpened by years of being unheard. One evening, as we sat on opposite ends of the room, she spoke without looking at me. "You're not angry anymore," she said. I wanted to deny it, but the truth was complicated. The anger had burned itself out. In its place was something heavier. Responsibility. Awareness. I was seeing consequences I'd never connected before. How easy words can rewrite someone's confidence. How silence can feel like agreement. How power doesn't always look like strength. She started letting me see behind the curtain of her life. Stories she'd never told anyone. Moments when she'd swallowed pain because reacting would make her seem dramatic. Times she'd been dismissed with a smile that meant nothing. Each story felt like a weight added to my chest, not because I was guilty, but because I finally understood. One night, she handed me an old photo. Us as kids. Me standing in front, confident, loud. Her just behind me, half hidden, smiling anyway. "You don't remember this," she said. "But I do." She told me how she used to practice speaking up in the mirror. How she'd rehearse arguments she never got to have. How she learned to shrink herself to fit the space others left for her. Listening to her felt like reading a journal I wasn't meant to see. But she wanted me to see it. That was the point. And slowly, something shifted again. This time, inside me. I began noticing how differently I reacted to things. I listened instead of interrupting. I hesitated before joking. I noticed emotions instead of brushing past them. It wasn't forced. It wasn't acting. It was instinct. And that scared me more than any rule she'd ever made. One afternoon, she asked me to speak for myself. Not to her. To someone else. Just a small conversation. My hands shook before it started. But once I began, my voice didn't break. It flowed. Calm. Clear. Honest. When it ended, I realized I was smiling. That night, she asked me if I still thought this was revenge. I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, revenge usually ends with satisfaction. This didn't. It felt unfinished. Ongoing. Like a lesson that kept unfolding no matter how much I learned. I think, I said slowly, you wanted me to feel the cost of being unseen. She nodded. And I don't think I can unfeel it now. She smiled. Not triumphantly. Relieved. But relief didn't mean safety. Because awareness comes with consequences. You can't unknow something. You can't step back into ignorance once you've seen behind the curtain. And I realized then that even if she stopped tomorrow, even if everything went back to normal on the outside, nothing inside me would ever be the same. That realization hit hardest when someone from my past spoke to me the way I used to speak to her. Casual. Dismissive. Thoughtless. And instead of brushing it off, it hurt. Deeply. I went home shaken. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That night, lying in bed, I understood something that made my chest tighten. My sister hadn't made me her doll to control me. She'd made me still. So I could finally feel everything I'd ignored. And now that I could feel it, the idea of going back terrified me. Because what if the person I was before wasn't who I really was at all? Fear changes shape when you stop running from it. That's what I learned next. It stopped being sharp and sudden and became slow, heavy, thoughtful. The kind of fear that asks questions instead of screaming warnings. I carried it with me as I moved through days that felt strangely normal and deeply unfamiliar at the same time. People around me adjusted faster than I expected. That was another shock. No dramatic reactions. No explosions. Just acceptance wrapped in assumptions. And that hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not because they were cruel, but because it showed me how easily the world fits you into whatever shape it decides makes sense. I started noticing how often I was interrupted. How praise sounded different. How mistakes were judged more harshly, yet emotions were expected to be softer, quieter, contained. It wasn't one big injustice. It was 1,000 small ones. Paper cuts you don't notice until you're bleeding. One evening, I finally snapped. Not outwardly. Inwardly. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection longer than I ever had before. I wasn't looking for flaws. I was looking for permission. To stop. To continue. To be something definite. I whispered my own name out loud. It sounded distant. Like it belonged to someone I used to know. When I came out, my sister was waiting. She didn't ask what happened. She asked how it felt. I don't know where I belong anymore, I said. My voice didn't shake. That scared me. She nodded slowly. That's the middle, she said. Everyone thinks transformation has a beginning and an end. But the middle is where people get lost. I asked her if she ever felt lost. She smiled sadly. All the time. I just learned to survive there. That was the first time I realized she wasn't enjoying this. Not anymore. Whatever satisfaction she'd imagined from revenge had faded. What remained was responsibility. For me. For what she'd started. She told me she never planned for it to go this deep. She wanted me to feel discomfort. Vulnerability. Awareness. She didn't expect me to listen. To change. To question myself. And now? I asked. Now, she said, I don't want to break you. I want you to choose. Choice again. That word followed me everywhere. That night, I dreamed I was standing between two doors. One led back to who I was. Loud. Certain. Untouched. The other led forward, into something undefined. I woke up before choosing. My heart was racing. In the morning, I realized something terrifying. The door behind me didn't feel safe anymore. I tried to remember what it felt like to not notice. To joke without thinking. To dominate conversations without guilt. I couldn't. The memories felt flat, like stories someone else told me about myself. Later that day, someone thanked me for listening. Really listening. It was casual. Unimportant. And it hit me harder than any insult ever had. Because I realized I'd never been thanked for that before. I went home quiet again. My sister watched me carefully, like someone monitoring a patient after a risky procedure. I think I'm changing, I said. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just said, I know. And in that moment, I understood the real cost of her revenge. It wasn't the clothes. Or the rules. Or the loss of control. It was the loss of denial. Once you see the world differently, it asks something of you. It demands courage. Consistency. Accountability. You don't get to pretend anymore. That night, as I lay awake, one thought kept looping in my head. If I go back now, I'll be lying. If I move forward, I don't know who I'll become. And for the first time, I realized the scariest transformations aren't the ones you can see. They're the ones that don't let you go back. The days after that thought felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. Nothing dramatic happened. No arguments. No ultimatums. And that was what made it harder. Silence gives your mind too much room to wander, and mine kept circling the same truth. This wasn't about my sister anymore. Whatever she had started, I was carrying forward on my own. I noticed it in the smallest moments. How I hesitated before speaking. How I read a room before reacting. How I felt a strange pull toward honesty, even when it made things uncomfortable. It wasn't weakness. It was awareness. And awareness comes with a price. One afternoon, I overheard my sister on the phone, speaking quietly in the other room. She sounded tired. Not angry. Not victorious. Just tired. When she noticed me listening, she ended the call and looked at me for a long time. I worry about you, she said. That sentence broke something open inside me. She hadn't worried about me before. Not like this. Not seriously. And suddenly, I saw the situation from another angle. This wasn't just revenge that had gone too far. It was two people trying to repair damage neither of us fully understood when it started. I asked her if she regretted it. She didn't answer right away. She sat down, rubbing her hands together, choosing her words carefully. I regret that pain was the only language I thought you'd understand, she said. But I don't regret that you finally listened. That night, I tried to imagine my future. Not next week. Not next month. Years from now. The image refused to settle. Every version felt incomplete. But one thing was clear. I couldn't pretend anymore. Pretending had become impossible. I realized then that I was grieving. Not for what I'd lost, but for who I thought I was. The certainty. The simplicity. The ignorance. Letting go of that felt like mourning someone who was still alive. There was a moment, late at night, when I almost asked her to end everything. To tell me it was over. That I could go back. The words sat on my tongue. But I swallowed them. Because if I asked, and she said yes, I knew I'd regret it. The next morning, she surprised me. You don't have to do this anymore, she said. Not for me. I looked at her, confused. My heart started racing. This stops being my lesson the moment you choose it for yourself, she continued. If you keep going, it has to be because it's yours. That was the most frightening offer she could have made. Freedom. Real freedom. No rules. No script. No one to blame. I spent that day alone. Walking. Thinking. Listening to my own thoughts without interruption. Every step felt like I was walking away from something and towards something else at the same time. By evening, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't undo what I'd learned. I couldn't unsee the world. I couldn't unfeel the weight of empathy now resting in my chest. When I came home, my sister looked up, searching my face for an answer I hadn't spoken yet. "I'm not done," I said quietly. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Not in victory. In acceptance." "Then," she said, "we'll do this right." That was the moment our roles finally changed. She wasn't my captor. I wasn't her doll. We were two people standing in the aftermath of a storm, deciding what kind of rebuilding we were capable of. But even as I felt calmer, a new fear crept in. Because choosing transformation means facing the world without excuses. And the world doesn't always reward honesty. As I lay down that night, one thought echoed louder than the rest. If this choice is truly mine, then the hardest part is still ahead. The hardest part came faster than I expected. It wasn't a single event. It was a series of moments that reminded me the world didn't pause for self-discovery. At school, at work, in casual conversations, I noticed how easy it was to slip back into old habits, old pride, old judgments. And every time I caught myself, I remembered the nights I spent learning to be still, to listen, to really see. My sister noticed too. She never pushed anymore, but she watched. Not like a predator. Not like a victor. Like someone making sure I didn't fall. And I did fall sometimes, even in small ways. A sarcastic remark I almost made. A quick dismissal of someone's opinion. And each time, she reminded me gently, awareness is practice, not perfection. One evening, I broke down in her room. Not crying like before, but trembling. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me. All the lessons she'd taught, all the truths I'd learned, they weren't easy. They weren't comfortable. And suddenly, I realized just how much of myself I'd lost along the way. Or maybe it wasn't lost. Maybe it was buried under layers I never noticed. She sat beside me, not saying anything. Just presence. Just letting me be human. "Do you hate me?" I whispered. Not angrily. Not accusingly. Honestly. Vulnerably. She looked at me and shook her head. "No. I don't hate you. I hate that the world made us think understanding has to hurt. That sometimes the only way to be heard is to make someone feel what you felt." That hit me harder than anything else. Not shame. Not fear. Empathy. Real, raw, unavoidable empathy. I realized then that her revenge had never been about me at all. It had been about teaching me to see beyond myself, even if the method was painful. The following weeks were strange. Routine resumed but felt different. I carried myself differently. Not for anyone else. Not because of a rule. Not because of my sister's expectation. I carried myself differently because I had no choice. The world had changed inside me. And the inside world is something you can't undo. We started talking more. About school, about work, about our childhood memories, about the ways we misunderstood each other. And every conversation felt like stitching pieces back together. Not the old us. A new us. Fragile, unsure, but alive. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in a store window. I studied it long and hard. Not to criticize. Not to judge. To see. And I saw someone changed. Someone shaped by lessons she didn't ask me to want, but that I now needed. Someone who could no longer pretend ignorance, but could still laugh, still love, still grow. I looked at her photo from years ago, the one of us as kids, and realized I could finally honor both the old me and the new me at the same time. That night, my sister brought out a small box. Inside were letters, one for each day of the transformation. Each one detailed moments I didn't notice her watching, lessons I didn't realize I'd learned, moments of strength she had seen in me. I opened one randomly. My handwriting stared back at me, but the words weren't mine. They were mine now, but reshaped. I smiled, for the first time in weeks, with pure clarity. "I don't need to be your doll anymore," I said softly. "No," she said. "You don't. But I'll always be here, to remind you what it feels like to be really seen." And in that moment, I finally understood the truth. Transformation isn't about who controls you. It's about who you become when control is taken away. And I realized I had become stronger, not because I survived her plan, but because I survived myself. I went to bed that night with a sense of quiet I hadn't known before. Not comfort. Not relief. Something deeper. Acceptance. And a strange anticipation. Because the story wasn't over. Growth never is. It's just that now. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I just moved, aware of each breath, each step. The world looked the same, but everything felt sharper, more vibrant, more immediate. And I realized that I hadn't needed her revenge to change who I was. I had needed her to show me the parts of myself I refused to see. She was in the kitchen, humming softly, organizing things. She glanced at me and smiled, not triumphantly, not mischievously, just a quiet, steady smile that felt like home. "I think I understand now," I said, almost to myself. "Everything you did, everything you made me go through, it wasn't about humiliation. It was about teaching me to feel, to see, to really exist beyond the version of me I always presented to the world." She nodded, pouring tea into 2 mugs. "That's right. And you did it. Not for me. Not for anyone else. You did it for yourself." I sat down, feeling the warmth of the mug between my hands, and for the first time, I realized how exhausted I had been before all of this. Exhausted from pride, from certainty, from assuming I knew everything about life and people. I had thought I was strong, but strength without awareness is just ignorance. She had taken me apart to build me up again. Days blended into weeks, but the transformation no longer felt like a burden. It felt like learning to walk after falling. Every conversation, every glance, every small choice became meaningful. I found myself listening more than speaking. I noticed details others overlooked. I felt the pulse of emotions around me and learned to respond with understanding rather than judgment. It was exhausting sometimes, but it was real. And reality, I realized, is more precious than comfort. There were moments of doubt. I questioned whether I had gone too far, whether I had lost the core of who I was. But every time I caught my reflection, calm, aware, attentive, I realized I hadn't lost myself. I had discovered a new layer, a deeper version of me I never knew existed. One evening, we sat together on the couch, quiet, letting the evening stretch around us. My sister looked at me and said softly, "You're no longer my doll. You're fully yourself. And I think you're finally ready to live without my guidance." I smiled, a quiet, grounded smile. "Thank you," I said. "Not just for teaching me, but for trusting me to choose who I become." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "The world will challenge you. People will expect the old you back, or versions of you that never existed. But now you can face it, fully prepared. And that's the victory neither of us could have imagined." For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of true freedom. Freedom that didn't rely on pride, fear, or appearances. Freedom that came from awareness, empathy, and acceptance. I realized that her revenge was never about control, it was about revelation. And I had survived it not by resisting, but by surrendering to the truth. As I walked through my day, I noticed the subtle beauty in everything. The way light fell across the floor, the cadence of a conversation, the small kindnesses that went unseen. I noticed my own reactions, patient and deliberate. And I knew that even if challenges came, even if the world tried to push me back into old patterns, I could meet it differently now. Calm, aware, real. That night, as I looked at myself in the mirror one last time before bed, I saw not a doll, not a victim, not the person I had been. I saw someone stronger. Someone open. Someone who had learned that transformation isn't about someone else shaping you. It's about discovering who you are when you finally pay attention to yourself. And in that quiet moment, I whispered to my reflection, to the room, to my sister, to the world, "I am me. And I am enough." The journey wasn't over. It never truly ends. But I had emerged from her revenge not broken, not diminished, but fully alive. And that was the truth no one could ever take away. The mirror reflected a new beginning. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next.